Sometimes, life feels like a dark room where we fumble for the light switch with trembling hands. Everything seems to be in its place: the job, the goals, the people. And yet, something inside us keeps quietly calling for help. It's almost a physical sensation, as if the chest carries a weight that words can't explain. We try to fill that emptiness with movement, noise, achievements. But the more we run, the more it feels like we're standing still. And it's in that moment, when nothing seems to make sense anymore, that the question haunting the most lucid minds appears. Why live if everything feels so empty? It was that very question that, more than a century ago, led a man to face his own hell. A Russian writer who knew what it was like to lose everything: freedom, hope, even faith. His name was Fyodor Dostoevsky, and his soul became the stage where God and despair fought a silent battle. He lost it all. And yet, right there, among the ruins of himself, he found something no reasoning could ever offer: a spark of meaning, because sometimes it's at the bottom of the abyss that we realize darkness is also made of light, just a kind that reason can't see. Maybe that's why Dostoevsky still speaks so deeply to us, because his hell wasn't made of fire. It was made of humanity. And if he taught us anything, it's that no one is safe from pain. But even within pain, there's still a path toward love. After all, how can one understand God while living in hell? And more than that, is it even possible to find God there? There are moments when life feels like it's on autopilot. We follow routines, hit goals, post smiles, but deep inside, something keeps whispering. Is this really it? It's a kind of silence that screams. A feeling that no matter how much the world says everything's fine, the heart still doesn't believe it. And it's curious, because this emptiness doesn't show up during our lowest moments. It often appears when everything seems too good, when the dream finally comes true, but the relief we expected never arrives. It's the paradox of those who have everything, yet feel the absence of something they can't even name. Maybe that's why so many people ask themselves quietly, right before falling asleep, why is it that even after winning, so many feel defeated inside? Why does the world look complete, while the soul feels broken? These questions aren't born from weakness. They come from clarity. It's the gaze that pierces through the surface of success and notices that something essential was left behind. Perhaps meaning itself, as Viktor Frankl once said. Those who have a why can bear almost any how. The problem is, when we lose that why somewhere along the way. Dostoevsky knew this emptiness long before he wrote about it. It wasn't just any kind of emptiness. It was the kind that swallows the ground beneath your feet and turns air into weight. A brilliant man, admired by many, yet haunted by doubts that no prize, applause, or recognition could silence. The same abyss that lives in so many of us today. The one that appears when we realize that success doesn't fill the soul, and that reason alone is just a flashlight with dying batteries against the darkness of existence. The truth is, emptiness scares us because it reveals how much we rely on fragile things: money, status, routine. Everything seems solid until the wind changes, and when it does, we realize that maybe we needed to lose a few certainties to discover what truly sustains us. Sometimes, you have to watch the ground collapse beneath you to understand that your foundation was in the wrong place. That's when the real question is born. Not what's missing in me, but what within me stays alive, even when everything else is gone. It was exactly on that unstable ground that Dostoevsky began his journey. He, like so many of us, had to face emptiness, not as a hole, but as a mirror. Because emptiness, when it isn't denied, turns into a path. It's where the soul begins to strip away appearances and move closer to what's essential. And perhaps, without realizing it, that's where he started walking towards something he couldn't yet name. A God who, for the moment, felt distant, but was waiting for him at the bottom of his own hell. Before becoming one of the greatest writers in history, Dostoevsky had already tasted the metallic flavor of despair. He was just over 30 when he was arrested for joining a group of intellectuals who discussed ideas considered too dangerous by the Tsar. The trial was quick, the sentence cruel. Condemned to death, He stood before the firing squad, blindfolded, feeling the cold touch of the rifles aimed at his chest. And then, in the final seconds before the shot, the unexpected happened. Pardon. His sentence was commuted to years of hard labor in Siberia, a miracle that came too late, because when forgiveness arrived, he had already died on the inside. Siberia became Dostoevsky's desert, the place where everything unnecessary was burned away. Imagine spending years among criminals, sleeping on frozen floors, without books, without freedom, without even the right to be treated as human. There, he learned what it means to lose everything: your body, your dignity, and perhaps hardest of all, your hope. The cold surrounding him on the outside mirrored exactly what he felt inside. No warmth, no purpose, just the weight of time dragging on like a frozen eternity. But the hell Dostoevsky endured wasn't only Siberia, it was within. He faced the kind of loneliness that not even silence can fill, that slow, corrosive emptiness. Like rust eating away at the soul, his physical prison became an existential one. And here, there's a mirror for all of us. How many times do we also feel imprisoned without bars, trapped inside our own guilt, fears and regrets? Dostoevsky's hell had walls and guards. Ours has screens, pressure, and expectations. At that time, he no longer had faith. He felt abandoned by God, forgotten by everyone. The world seemed like a meaningless stage, and he, a spectator forced to watch his own downfall. That's where Jung helps us understand what he was going through. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Alone and stripped of everything, Dostoevsky began to look inward, and what he saw wasn't pretty. He faced the shadows of his own soul. Fear, anger, guilt. But paradoxically, it was there, in that deep descent into darkness, that he finally began to wake up. Maybe hell is exactly that. The place where the ego breaks so something greater can emerge. Dostoevsky had to lose the world in order to start finding himself. And what once felt like punishment slowly began to turn into revelation. Because deep down, hell isn't a place to die. It's the place where, if we can endure the heat, we can finally be reborn. After years in Siberia, Dostoevsky returned to the world a different man. Or maybe the world itself no longer made sense. He had seen the cruelest side of existence: pain without logic, suffering without purpose. He tried to make sense of it, to reason with it, to give names to the shadows. But reason, which once felt like a lighthouse, now looked more like a candle flickering in the wind. And that's when the great question began to haunt him. If there is a God, why is there so much suffering? And if there isn't, why are we still capable of love? The human mind doesn't accept the absurd easily. We crave answers, explanations that make the chaos feel manageable. But what do we do when silence is the only answer left? Dostoevsky lived that anguish with the intensity of someone who had touched the void and returned to tell the story. He didn't want to believe that pain was meaningless. Yet he couldn't understand a God who seemed to watch in silence. It's an old wound, one that runs through centuries and still disturbs us today. What hurts more, the pain itself, or the emptiness it leaves when no one responds? Nietzsche once said that when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. And that's exactly what happened to Dostoevsky. He looked too deep, and what he saw wasn't just the evil in the world, but the fragility of humanity before it. Evil, for him, wasn't an external monster. It lived inside each of us. Reason tries to control it, to justify it, to explain it away, but it can't heal it. It's like trying to fix a wound with words. Logic can describe pain, but it can't ease it. It's striking how this same dilemma is still alive today. We live in a world that's increasingly rational, technological, full of explanations, yet empty of meaning. We replaced God with algorithms and faith with distraction. When suffering comes, we turn to reason, and it gives us statistics, not comfort. Consumption became anesthesia. Social media turned into confessionals without forgiveness. And amid all this noise, the silence of God still echoes, maybe louder than ever. Deep down, Dostoevsky stood before the same collapse that many face today, the fall of logic as a safe place to stand. He learned the hard way that the intellect can explain the world but cannot sustain it. There are pains too heavy for the mind. Only the heart can hold them. And sometimes, God's silence isn't absence. It's invitation. An invitation to stop asking why and start asking what for in that subtle shift. Despair begins to turn into search. Dostoevsky learned, in the most brutal way, that suffering isn't only destruction. It's also revelation. At the bottom of despair, he began to notice something that refused to die inside him. Something the cold, the chains, and time itself couldn't erase. It was a kind of spark. Small, almost invisible, but alive, in the midst of extreme pain, he realized there is something beyond reason. A quiet dignity that's born when the soul refuses to hate. The fall, once a symbol of defeat, began to reveal what was most human in him. And perhaps what was most divine too. The real hell, Dostoevsky realized, wasn't physical punishment. It was the loss of love. He saw that the soul becomes a desert when it stops loving. Even in the midst of pain, the absence of love was the deepest hell. The one we dig ourselves when we let our hearts harden. And it's strange because that still happens to us today. Every time pain makes us distrust others, every time fear makes us build walls, we're the ones constructing our own abyss. Maybe suffering itself doesn't destroy us. What destroys us is ceasing to love because of it. Jung once said that the encounter with the shadow is the beginning of healing. The shadow is everything we reject in ourselves. Fear, anger, envy, guilt. Facing it hurts, but it's necessary. Dostoevsky dove headfirst into that confrontation. Instead of denying his own darkness, he chose to walk through it. And there, in the middle of his inner chaos, he began to notice traces of something greater. It was as if, by accepting his own fragility, he made room for what is eternal. He descended into hell and found people, and in people, traces of God. How many times in our own downfalls do we try to escape pain as if we were running from a fire? But maybe the fire didn't come to burn us. It came to purify us. The losses, the disappointments, the days when everything seems to collapse. Sometimes those are the very moments that reveal what truly holds us up. It's easy to be kind when life goes well. The real test begins when everything falls apart, and we must choose between hardening or staying human. Dostoevsky chose to stay human. His fall didn't make him bitter. It made him deep. He understood that pain, when embraced, can turn into compassion. That a fall, when accepted, stops being an ending and becomes a passage. And maybe that's why his stories still touch us so deeply today. Because at some point, we all have to descend into our own hell to discover whether we're still capable of love. In the frozen fields of Siberia, Dostoevsky found a kind of faith he had never known before. It wasn't a faith that could be explained, written about, or preached. It lived quietly in the weary eyes of prisoners who, even with nothing left, still knew how to give thanks. They were men who had lost everything: freedom, dignity, the future. And yet they prayed with a serenity that disarmed even the most hardened skepticism. They didn't seek to understand God. They simply trusted him. And that simple, unshakable trust began to touch something in Dostoevsky that reason could never reach. He, the intellectual who once believed the mind could solve everything, now found himself small before the wisdom of the humble. There was something in these broken men that defied logic, a quiet strength, a peace that was born right in the middle of pain. It was as if they carried within them a secret the wise had long forgotten. That meaning isn't found in understanding, but in acceptance. Those the world despised seemed closer to heaven than those who knew its name in Latin. Dostoevsky, the condemned man, was now discovering that true greatness might have always been hidden among the small, and it's striking how relevant that still feels today. We live in a time that worships success but runs from vulnerability. We're taught to look strong, to hide the cracks, but it's through the cracks that the light comes in. As Leonard Cohen once said, the simple people Dostoevsky met had no pride, no pretension, only surrender, and perhaps that's why he began to see something divine in them. A God who doesn't live in temples or speeches, but in the eyes of those who keep believing. Even when their world is falling apart, that experience forever changed Dostoevsky's view of humanity. He began to see, in the marginalized, the sinners, the outcasts the system had thrown away, the purest reflection of divine compassion, not a distant compassion, but one that understands suffering because it has suffered too. That was the God of the prisoners, not the God of the throne, but the God of the ground, the one who doesn't point fingers, but opens his arms, who doesn't demand perfection, only sincerity. Tolstoy would later find that same faith among the peasants of Russia, and maybe that's why their souls recognized each other, even though they were so different. Both discovered that wisdom doesn't descend from libraries. It rises from the fields, from calloused hands, from the tears no one sees. Dostoevsky understood there, among chains and whispered prayers, that true faith isn't an idea, it's a gesture, and that sometimes the most broken hearts are the ones that most resemble God. When Dostoevsky finally left Siberia, he was no longer the same man. Something inside him had shattered, and at the same time, something new had been born. It was as if he had crossed the darkest night and, upon reaching the other side, found a new dawn, not one filled with certainty, but one that illuminated things differently, softer, more human. He had learned that true evil doesn't live outside of us, but within, and that love, however small it may seem, is the only force strong enough to resist despair. This realization didn't come from triumph, but from humility. By watching those who suffered, Dostoevsky came to understand that love is the only act that still makes sense when everything else fails. He saw that love is resistance, an act of defiance against the absurd. In a world that had crushed him, he chose to keep loving, not out of naivety, but out of wisdom. Because if hatred destroys the one who feels it, love sustains the one who gives it. "Beauty will save the world," he wrote in The Idiot. And that beauty isn't aesthetic, it's moral. It's the glow of kindness shining through chaos. For Dostoevsky, love wasn't romance. It was survival. It was the only candle in the dark. And even if small, it was enough to light the way. There's something beautiful about the fact that someone who witnessed so much horror could still believe in beauty. But maybe that's exactly why. Those who have known darkness learn to value every flicker of light. And that's what makes him universal. At some point, all of us need that small flame, whether in a hug, a gentle word, or a quiet act of care. Love is the answer that can't be explained, only lived. Viktor Frankl, who survived another kind of hell, once said, "Even in the most terrible circumstances, a man still has the freedom to choose his attitude." Dostoevsky understood that, long before Frankl was born, he realized that true freedom isn't about changing what happens outside. It's about choosing who will be within the pain. And in that sense, love is a radical choice, a way of saying yes to life, even when it seems to deny everything. Perhaps the greatest miracle in Dostoevsky's story is this. He came back from hell still believing in humanity. And if he could love after everything he endured, then maybe we can too. Because love isn't the act of someone who doesn't suffer. It's the act of someone who suffers, but refuses to give up. And in the end, that's what makes us invincible. The ability to keep offering light, even when everything around us is dark. When Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment, he wasn't just crafting a novel about guilt and redemption. He was writing about himself, about what he saw and felt inside the frozen cells of Siberia. Raskolnikov, the protagonist, is the reflection of a man trying to justify evil through logic. A man who believes he can cross moral boundaries in the name of a greater reason. But conscience doesn't obey reason. The soul cannot be convinced by arguments. No matter how hard he tries, the weight of guilt follows him like a shadow. And it's that very shadow that both destroys and transforms him. Dostoevsky knew that reasoning alone can't save anyone. The mind can explain a mistake, but it can't forgive it. No amount of logic is enough when the soul is bleeding. What sets us free isn't intellect, it's repentance. And true repentance doesn't come from shame, but from understanding. When Raskolnikov finally admits his guilt, he's not just confessing to a crime. He's recognizing his own humanity. And that's the essence of Dostoevsky's philosophy. Redemption doesn't come from perfection, but from acknowledging imperfection. That idea is profoundly human. We all carry small burdens of guilt, words that hurt, promises we broke, choices that still keep us awake at night. Sometimes we justify them, rationalize them, hide them, but the weight doesn't go away. It just changes shape, until one day, the heart decides it's time to stop running. That's when forgiveness becomes possible. Not the forgiveness of others, but our own, the kind that lets us breathe again. Kierkegaard once said that faith begins where reason ends. And that's exactly what Crime and Punishment shows. While Raskolnikov tries to solve the abyss through thought, he only sinks deeper. It's only when he surrenders, when he accepts that he doesn't know everything, that something new begins to grow. Forgiveness, in Dostoevsky's world, is always a form of rebirth. It's not about erasing the past, but making peace with it. It's the courage to look within and say, I've failed, but I can still love. In the end, that's what makes Dostoevsky's work such a powerful mirror. It forces us to confront our own contradictions, to see that within each of us lives both a sinner and a saint, a selfish one and a compassionate one, a cold heart and a tender one. And life is the battlefield where these forces meet every day. Forgiveness is the bridge between them, the point where the human touches the divine. With time, Dostoevsky came to understand that faith isn't an explanation. It's a surrender. It doesn't arise from reasoning, but from letting go. He, who once tried so hard to understand suffering with his mind, discovered that the heart speaks another language. God doesn't speak to convince. He speaks to comfort. That simple idea captures the entire turning point of his spiritual journey. He realized that some answers don't arrive as arguments, but as silence. And with time, he came to see that perhaps silence is a kind of answer too. Dostoevsky's faith wasn't naive or dogmatic. It was a faith covered in dirt, built through pain, doubt, and fear. He didn't believe because everything made sense. He believed despite the fact that nothing did. That's what mature faith looks like, the kind that's born when the ground disappears. Yet we keep walking anyway. It's not proven by words, but by the quiet decision to keep loving when life no longer seems to deserve love. It's the silent gesture of someone who, even amid chaos, still finds the courage to say, I trust. That kind of surrender isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's realizing that control is an illusion, and that trying to understand everything is one of the subtlest forms of despair. How often do we do the same? We try to control the future, predict, plan, and avoid every surprise. But deep down, life was never meant to fit inside our spreadsheets, and when the unpredictable arrives, a loss, an illness, a disappointment, that's when we find out whether what we had was faith or just expectation. Faith, unlike reason, doesn't demand explanations. It blooms in the dark, Blaise Pascal once said. The heart has its reasons which reason knows nothing of. And Dostoevsky seemed to understand that with his whole being. For him, faith wasn't believing in something distant. It was trusting the invisible within himself. It was the courage to accept that meaning can exist, even when the mind can't reach it. He stopped seeking a logical God and began to feel a present one. Not the God who fixes everything, but the one who simply stays. And that changes everything. It turns despair into trust, fear into surrender. In the end, Dostoevsky discovered that faith isn't about understanding. It's about remaining. Remaining when everything falls apart, when certainty disappears, when the world feels indifferent. It's the yes that endures in the middle of the no. That was the faith that saved him, and maybe it's the same faith that could save us too. The kind that comes from someone who's tired of fighting the inevitable and finally rests, not in resignation, but in the quiet trust that love, somehow, is still holding everything together. Dostoevsky's hell was made of cold and silence. Ours is made of noise and speed. He faced chains of iron. We face invisible ones, deadlines, demands, expectations. The modern world runs at a pace that looks like progress, but often it's just escape. We run from boredom, from loneliness, from stillness, as if silence were the enemy. We're surrounded by stimulation, yet disconnected from ourselves. And amid all this motion, emptiness returns, disguised as exhaustion, anxiety, or apathy. It's the same emptiness Dostoevsky felt, only now it comes with Wi-Fi. We live in an age that promises meaning everywhere, in careers, relationships, and the things we buy. But the more we try to fill the void, the larger it grows. Maybe that's because the void doesn't want to be filled. It wants to be heard. We stay too busy to notice how deeply tired we are. As Byung-Chul Han said, modern suffering doesn't come from physical pain, but from the exhaustion of constantly trying to be more. Today's human is a prisoner who smiles in photos but carries a nameless guilt inside, the guilt of never feeling enough. How many of us are trapped without bars, condemned by an inner voice that never stops? You should be doing more. You should be better. You should be happy. It's a prison built from expectations. And the punishment never ends. We get so used to the noise that silence begins to scare us. And without realizing it, we start searching for distractions just to avoid thinking. But what is that escape, if not the fear of looking inward and facing what truly hurts? The modern hell is the opposite of Dostoevsky's. His was made of absence, ours of excess. His cold burned, ours numbs. And yet, the question remains the same. How do we find God, or meaning, in the midst of this chaos? The answer might be the same one he found. Stop running. Look inward, as frightening as it may be. Acknowledge the pain, the exhaustion, the fear, and accept them as part of existence, because denying the void only makes it deeper. In the end, the inner hell is the space where the soul begs to be heard. And when we finally grow quiet enough to listen, something shifts. It's in that uncomfortable silence that compassion begins to take shape, first for ourselves, then for others. Dostoevsky discovered this centuries ago, and maybe that's the most relevant advice we could ever receive. Meaning isn't out there, nor in the promises of the world. It's in the courage to sit before your own emptiness, and instead of running away, simply say, "I'm here." Dostoevsky didn't find God when things got better. He found him when everything got worse. He realized that the sacred doesn't live on mountaintops, but in the depths of the valleys. And maybe that's why his faith ran so deep, because it was born from the ground. After knowing hell, he understood that God isn't waiting outside for us to find him. He's hidden within the pain itself, among the broken pieces. For Dostoevsky, pain was no longer punishment. It was a portal. To go through it was to go through himself. That understanding changes everything. If God can be found in suffering, then pain stops being absurd. It becomes an encounter. It's the moment when the soul, stripped of pride, realizes it can still feel, still love, still believe. Dostoevsky saw this not as a dogma, but as an experience. When he spoke of redemption, he wasn't talking about religion. He was talking about humanity, because what saved him wasn't a doctrine. It was love. And love, perhaps, is the closest word we have for God. It's a beautiful thought. Maybe God never promised us paradise. Maybe he gave us hell so we could learn to love within it. That's the revelation running through all of Dostoevsky's work. That suffering, when it doesn't harden us, brings us closer to the essence of life. That there's a secret beauty in still being able to feel, even when everything hurts. And it's in that feeling that God whispers, not to pull us out of hell, but to walk beside us through it. And what does that have to do with us? Everything. Because one way or another, we all go through our own private hells. Every loss, every fear, every crisis that breaks us open. And it's in those moments that Dostoevsky's story becomes a mirror. Maybe hell isn't the place where God is absent. Maybe it's the place where we finally begin to hear him. Pain isn't the end. It's the reminder that we're still alive, that there's still something inside us that insists on feeling. In the end, Dostoevsky leaves us with a question that still echoes today. In which part of our own hell might the thing we're searching for be hiding? Maybe meaning isn't waiting out there to be found. Maybe it's right here, within us, asking to be recognized. Because the real miracle isn't escaping pain. It's finding, within it, the love that keeps us standing.